they had some money, they're sitting in their home office, but like they want to do something and there's no one to call and work on it with, whatever or otherwise. To me, unless you have an executive team, you are a president. People who went through all of those stages, and reinvented themselves and became the 50 million CEO and 100 million. It's so rare. It's so rare. Lower middle market growth private equity is like totally different. They tend to have a fund. That fund invests in 10 concepts or platforms. I want to run a new product. Like, hey, Jerome, go run me a spec for that. And Marcy, go do the thing and whatever, call the marketing team. And like, so you're used to this leverage.
There's a difference between a dream chaser and a dream catcher. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Dream Catchers podcast. I'm your host, Jerome, and I've got one of the most impressive guys I have met on the show with me today. It's really interesting because when I look at the script, it says Robert Glazer, but when I met him, his name was Bob. And so I'm like, well, which one do I use when I'm doing the intro today? And I didn't ask him. And so we're doing this in real time. Bob, man, what's going on, man? How are things up there in the Northeast?
They're good. They seem a lot drier than the Southeast, so we'll take it.
Yeah, we these storms have been pretty intense, and I really
Yeah,
hope
historical.
yeah, yeah, I hope folks are drying out and getting life back together after the disasters. It's kind of crazy right now, but man. So I love to open up the show with. So you had an exit,
Yeah.
yeah.
Is that is there more to that?
Nope, it's just
Yeah.
that. And when you say yeah, that means you're qualified to be here, man. So I I think you think about exits differently than most people do. And so that can you add some color to that? Because I think most founders just are trying to get to the payday, but you think about business and exits a lot differently.
Yeah, and so my world changed a lot in the last couple of years in terms of if I look back to 2020, 2021, I was spending the majority of my time as the CEO of Acceleration Partners, and then as the chairman of another business called Brand Cycle that I had founded and we had spun off, and actually my sister was running that business. And then in 2020, we brought on a private equity partner for Acceleration Partners. As part of that investment, I had planned to hand over the CEO role to my longtime number two, something we had been talking about for a few years, and begin sort of stepping out of the day-to-day business. The other business went from sort of, and so I'm still involved in that business today, although in a very different role. The other business I stepped out of as soon as that transaction went through, because I was not involved in any of the operating. I was effectively kind of a board member and investor at that point. So yeah, it was a lot of changes. From that was all sort of in the span of 12 months. And then I started a very planned deceleration at Acceleration Partners. From kind of year after that investment, I stepped down as CEO. Still involved maybe 3 to 4 days a week, although really made the handover clean. I've seen a lot of people step over and then they're still in those meetings and answering questions and otherwise, and then sort of dropping to 3 days a week and now more like 1 day a week. So it's very, very different. And I had done a lot of planning for that. It did not mean that there still weren't a lot of intended consequences or unintended consequences or things that like I was like, oh well, it'd be different for me. But it wasn't.
So, all right, you said you planned for it. Most people don't plan for it in the traditional sense. They're like, "Oh, I'm gonna sell it," and then they're out,
Yeah.
and they like hit a wall because they went from, I don't know, 60 hours a week or 40 hours a week or whatever they were working to no hours a week. And unless they become senior vice president of the division, which is their company in the new holdco, uh, they don't have a whole lot to do. And so when you say you planned, was that just getting the business ready, or did you do stuff to get yourself ready?
Both. And I look, you and I have been in a lot of the same rooms or circles and seen stories of people who've made, considerable amounts of money selling their business and walking away and all this stuff. And that wasn't me. But the and we're able to leave it kind of day one. Maybe some of them wanted to. And generally, I heard a lot of things over the years and talking to people who exited their business in some way. And the word that came up was sort of a loss of their platform, or sort of, I kind of look at that as leverage, right? Maybe like, they had some money, they're sitting in their home office, but like they want to do something and there's no one to call and work on it with, whatever or otherwise. And I also saw pretty consistently that the people who, thought they negotiated this deal to leave on day one and how great it was, and they wanted to walk away and, whole thing, like they seem to be like the most depressed. And there's a very small violin for these folks outside of these circles, but, you've heard these circles where they went from 100 miles an hour just to zero. And so when I realized that I did not want to run this business forever and it was getting kind of too big, we particularly look for a partner that would allow for me to kind of have a gradual drawdown. So I had seen a lot of those dynamics. I was already building kind of a lifeboat and a platform on the side, kind of heading into that. I also, intentionally wanted something where maybe it was a 3 to 5 year kind of window of deceleration. Again, still didn't mean that it all went according to plan. But I had thought a lot about those things because I had just seen the movie, as you've seen the movie kind of over and over again with a lot of different people, and thinking about like there's some pros to this, and I think it's good to know when you're ready to do something different and move on. But if you do that too quickly, if you don't have those other things to get up and do, if you don't have a platform, there are potentially unintended consequences.
Yeah, we call that collateral damage. Um,
Yeah.
with all of the conflict in the Middle East and Russia and so on. Like,
Yeah. I was gonna say, I'm not even sure it's collateral. It might be direct, but I get
well,
it.
yeah, I don't think anybody. So we call it collateral because I don't think anybody actually does it
Right,
intentionally.
right.
Like
Yeah.
for the
Right.
people that they care about, the folks that are close to them or impacted relationships in a very big way, and then the people that they leave behind in the business is another piece of that. Um, so it's the words you use are very interesting because I don't find many founders saying them. And so you said chairman of the board. You said you handed it over to your number two. Uh, that suggests that there was true succession planning and intentionality in it. And so I guess how'd you know or who helped you do
Yeah.
that? Because most people don't get there.
Yeah. I I try to look, I think it's important to be introspective and to be honest with yourself. And every time you double a business, if you're the founder, every time you double the business, you need to relearn skills and learn new different things. And I kind of think you need to make this like, and a lot of stuff's going to break. And so you kind of need to make this commitment like, oh, do I want to do this? Right. And so when the business doubled from 1 million to revenue to 5 million in revenue, it's like, oh yeah, I want to do that, learn how to do that. 5 million to 10 million. We got to a size in revenue where when I started to look at what I liked to do and what the job of being the CEO of this 300 person company required, there was for those who can't see us, Jerome's drawing the split path. There was a divergence. And I think I was able to say, like this next turn, like I'm not. One of the things I said is that, a lot of people inherently don't leave the job that they started in the business. Like they're a sales minded person, they're a marketing minded founder or otherwise. Um, and I try to objectively looked at what did I want to do and what did the business need. And I liked being the R&D department. But when we were 300, I liked the new idea. And Matt and I had a great relationship. I was the CEO. Increasingly, more of the leadership team went to him. He was the president. And he kind of ran the current year business. And I kind of focused on what are we going to be doing next year. And that's appropriate for 10 or 50 to 100. But at 300 people, the R&D department was a lot smaller of the business. And your job, I see a lot of founders, I don't know whether it's multiple personality disorder or ego, give them, they are the chairman, the founder, and the CEO and the president, of their 5-person company. I actually did not take the CEO title until we were almost, I think, 150 people. And we started having, I was managing director and we started having other managing directors and it got confusing. To me, unless you have an executive team, you are a president because the CEO is the chief executive officer and your job is to work with these teams and meet with them and lead other people and do all of that stuff. And as that became the job, and doing a lot of these things, I realized like I want to get back to the ideas and the new stuff and the otherwise. So it reached a point where my ego and my rational brain were having a conversation, and I realized that look, the job of the CEO is actually more of what Matt is doing at this point, and he deserves that, and it's an opportunity for him, and I don't want that job. I don't want to be doing 12 performance reviews every quarter and be in meetings all day long. That doesn't bring me energy. So I think as the business is growing, people don't. I've heard people advocate in personal relationships that there should almost be contracts, right? That where every 5 years, it comes up for renewal, and you think about like, do we want to do this again? And well, there's some problems to that, and my wife would probably not like that concept. I understand the intent behind it, and so that's sort of what I tried to do, and I was excited, and then at one point I realized, nope, like I'm not. I don't want to run the 500. I want this to be a 500-person company and do all this stuff, but what that job does, not only do I not want it, I'm not the best person for it.
And so it's really interesting. I was having a conversation about that today. It sounds like you're not the manager, right? So there's some people who just want to like manage the business, but it sounds you're the grower, and I think the infrastructure and the uh, maybe it's just the administrative piece of a company of that size doesn't fit with what I traditionally think of an entrepreneur or a founder would be. Is that accurate, or am I
Yeah, and
wrong?
and I one of my business sort of maxims is that I think we way too often focus on exceptions, right? Like let's think about like LeBron James, Michael Jordan, like you know, once in a generational athletes. Like people look at that as the reason why they should quit school and drop out of school, right? That is a really bad comparison. So similarly, people would look at a Jeff Bezos or a Mark Zuckerberg or people who went through all of those stages, and reinvented themselves and became the 50 million CEO and 100 million. It's so rare. It's so rare. And again, you can focus on the exception, but you'd be focusing on what worked 0.1% of the time. And I think they both had the unique skill set to do it. They had the interest, but it requires tremendous reinvention and becoming a different person or a different kind of leader and different kind of manager. And so I think oftentimes we point to these exceptions when the rule would tell you that it has a much lower chance of success. And some of the leaders I've admired over the years are the ones who understand their space, right? They're the 0 to 10 person and she goes and does that again, or they're the 50 to 100 guy and goes and does that again, or they take the company public, but I don't like running public companies, CFO, so they go and do that again. I think those people inherently understand what they're good at, and it's very hard to hold the ego in check on these things because we never want to say it's not I could do it, but part of want can do something well is really both liking it and wanting it to do it.
Yeah, doing it well with no energy it's a grind.
Yeah, and
And
you and I have seen like the clear salesperson who's the CEO when like you're just doing sales. You're not doing any of the responsibilities of the CEO. So you're kind of like you have this person who's kind of doing this for you and you're not calling them that and they're probably going to leave. Like I said, people tend to default back to their tendency. Like I was a marketer, if I was a finance person who came up through these, I default to that. Am I really switching to be the CEO, which is the chief executive officer, which manages the executives and works with an executive team. And that's about people and meeting and boards and a lot of those things that some people really excel at and some people don't.
So, man, this is good. All right. So, you the phrasing around bringing on a financial partner, um, I don't I think the M&A folks talk about it that way,
Yeah.
strategic and this, that, or the third. And but when somebody's on the sell side, they don't usually say that. So why do that? Why bring on a financial partner?
Yeah, look, when you there's a whole bunch of different types of deals that you can do, and I think when a founder is your rich uncle could bequeath you a house to live in, right? And it's a $5 million house, and he gives you the house, but you start to realize, wow, it's really expensive to pay for the electricity and the upkeep, and something keeps leaking or otherwise. I think that's like growing a business. You grow a business, all your equities in the business. One day I sort of looked at it and I was like, wow, like this is getting to be like a big business. And we had COVID hit and like this is sort of all on me financially. And I've got a personal loan guarantee out and it's tied to my house. And like it kind of feels like I can't afford to live in this, house or if something would go wrong. So I think that was the case. We recovered from COVID, but there were some scary moments where I was like, am I going to have to decide between, I don't know, my family and other people's family or otherwise? And so the business was big enough that it just felt, and people were always looking to me, and I was like, I don't want to keep kind of swinging for the fences. At this point, I'd like to like, you're constantly reinvesting in your business every year, right? No matter what the profit says, there seems to be no cash because if it's growing fast enough, you're just reinvesting it and putting it back in. And I felt like, look, I'm at the point where we kind of harvest this, but like I got other people on the team that they want to grow and they want to go to the next stage. So I want to do that too, but I don't really want all the risk onto me. And so that's where a financial partner, comes in and can take on some of that risk and burden and provide the growth capital and provide capital for acquisitions and help the founder not have all their net worth, tied up in the business. Um, but the key was it wasn't an endpoint, for us. It was a kind of new growth plan. And it's not like, hey, we're all going home in this. It was, hey, we found a partner that's excited to help us kind of grow. And I think it gave everyone kind of what they were looking for, which was to continue growing, to have some upside in that business, for not everyone to be looking at me saying, what are we going to do this year and how much do we want to spend and otherwise. So I think it's increasingly, an attractive opportunity for a lot of founders and business owners.
Yeah, the taking money off the table piece is so important because it could all go bad.
Yeah.
And if it all goes bad in year 28 of 30, uh, I don't know what you're going to do, especially if you didn't take any money off the table at year
Yeah, we
15.
we have a huge, we have a huge bias. Again, to me, the things that are exceptions, not rules. The last 10 years were an aberration in terms of free money, things going well, people being able to get out of any trouble. The last 3 or 4 years, I would say I've seen as many businesses go bankrupt as I have be successful, and products that I own and going at it. Like that's more of the typical business cycle where you can lose it all. And as you said, you're 28 out of 30. And what the P&L says, you have a business that does a couple $1 million in profit a year, and there's nothing coming out, to the fact you're reinvesting, it's going back into inventory, it's going back into otherwise, it's stuck in cash flow. And it's great to have enterprise clients and they pay you 180 days later, but your employees, like to get paid that month. So it can seem like people are, rolling in money, but it's really not there. And a lot of people, have, who don't have that financial acumen on their team, even without an exogenous event, run into trouble with that growth. So yeah, I think that combination of like, this isn't all on me, and but also like, hey, there's capital to grow, and a partner and someone who understands these aspects of the business is good. Most people can get a business to a certain level, but if you've never done it before, there's a lot of mistakes you're gonna make for that first time.
And so when you were, I imagine you didn't pick the first person that showed up, but maybe you did. How did you figure out what the right financial partner was or who they were?
Look, I always believed in like talking to people that were on the road ahead of you and getting as much experience from them as they can. And I had some coaches or otherwise. And what I actually did was a couple years before this, I had put on a single piece of paper kind of what I wanted over the next 5 years. And that if there was a partner that met all these criteria in terms of, um, financial, cultural, structural, my role, otherwise, then I would be kind of open to listen. And so I kind of wrote that wish list out, a couple years in advance. Like I've done a lot of other things that I write, like kind of a vision or otherwise for. And then when we started looking around and we had a couple people that were interesting, I kind of pulled out that sheet, and it became very clear that one of them just completely intersected with that whole list around. It was very important to me that the company and the leadership team and the culture, our ability to be the platform. In private equity and roll-ups, there's typically, I didn't even realize this before, like a lot of we think of private equity as like large, like buy a company and strip the costs out of it and all that stuff. Like lower middle market growth private equity is like totally different. They tend to have a fund. That fund invests in 10 concepts or platforms. And then those platforms tend to acquire two or three companies each. So you are either a platform or a role. They don't just invest in kind of a one-off company. And there's pros and cons to being the platform or being a role in. I really wanted to be the platform because I wanted to be our team, our culture, and really, have you do a lot of extra work that you don't get paid for as the platform. A lot of the roll-ins, roll in and leave, and they get the same kind of upside benefits, with their equity. Yeah, I talked to a lot of people. I got myself educated. Having, as a platform, we
Hey guys, as you might know, a very small percentage of the people who actually listen to this podcast are subscribers. So do us a favor, subscribe. In fact, we did some analytics and we found out that only 25% of the people who listen are subscribers. And our goal is to get that to about 75% over the next 3 months. So do us a favor, hit the subscribe button so you get notified when our new episodes come. We plan to bring immense value to you guys going forward as we continue to improve the content that we create at Dreamcatcher. Your dreams should be real. Let's get back to the show.
We have bought 4 businesses. I've probably looked at hundreds of others. And I can tell you that like the people who really talk to smart people who have done what they want to do in transit, I can tell you who's going to sell their business, because there's people that clearly have done their homework and are realistic and understand the market and understand the reality. And there's people that like talk to their cousin Vinny, and he told them a bunch of stuff, and they are going to spend like 3 years wasting their time because what they're talking about and asking about is so standard deviations away from where markets are. Like I always have a thing, like markets have market clearing prices, and you should understand what those are. I am just I can tell the people that have understand the market and have talked to peers who actually have done it, and people who think they're just really smart. And by the way, these are the people who their banker is, they don't have a banker. They're going to do it themselves. And their lawyer is their trust and estate lawyer. And their husband's a lawyer, so they don't need a lawyer. And these deals never get done. I see you laughing. I know you've been through this.
Yeah,
Like I,
because I It's funny that so many people think that there's just going to be a line wrapped around a building to buy their business. It's just for most people, that's not a thing. I mean, I think only 20% of deals that get listed get done. And
Yeah, and
that's
as
getting
as
listed.
you know, there's a whole bunch of investors whose whole motto is to get you under an LOI, and then drag it out and wear you down to death and then retrade. But to me, if you're going to do this once, this is like selling your house. Like if you're going to do this once, like you should have the most experienced team of professionals that you could work with, and not try to this is not a like do it yourself project. It's not a why can't I think of the acronym, whatever
DIY,
the
DIY.
DIY. Yes, thank you. This is not like a DIY like home project. Again, my advisors and sort of for years in advance of doing this were people that did the exact thing that I wanted to do, and I talked through all of it with them and understood what worked, what didn't work, which advisors they worked with that were helpful, which weren't, or otherwise.
So, all right. So you talk to folks who did it. Um, Did they talk to you about what happens on the other side of the exit? Because I think that for you personally, not for the business, but for you personally, did they talk about the other side of the transaction?
They were all sort of in it a little bit. I had been in these groups. YPO had put on a thing years ago, and I had gone to it, and it was like terribly sobering. Like everyone was miserable. And so I did a lot of listening that day. And again, that's where that word platform kept coming up. Like, and I noticed they all like, I'm missing my platform. I'm missing the platform, sitting in their family office of one with $50 million and wanting to do something wasn't doing it for them. So maybe not from those people on the emotional side, but I feel like I had read enough stories and talked to enough people that I knew that I knew enough about that. In fact, that was one of the structural reasons why I didn't want something that, I wanted something that had a longer transition period, figuring like it would take me a few years to figure out what was next or otherwise. And I needed it, even though I had started myself down that path, and I had started with the writing and the authorship and sort of building a platform because I was like, oh, here's a lifeboat I can jump into, right? And that way, when I'm writing an article, 100,000 people are reading it and not like one, because that probably will be inherently more rewarding to me if I want to say something.
So platform, and that's actually the first time I've heard somebody say that, but I in that way. But I love the concept of knowing what is next, what your identity is outside of the company. I think that's probably the definition of platform.
Yeah, it's identity. I saw more maybe like to me it was leverage, right? You're used to when you run this organization having leverage. I want to run a new product. Like, hey, Jerome, go run me a spec for that. And Marcy, go do the thing and whatever, call the marketing team. And like, so you're used to this leverage, right? Where you can pick up the phone and call people. And now you have this idea and you're like, huh, what am I gonna tell myself? Like, give out stuff for myself to do. So I thought that was a pretty interesting insight that while fairly obvious was not upon hearing it would not be obvious to the outside person about how much that would look. These people had the money to hire people, but they didn't have, it wasn't their team, it wasn't their people, right? It just wasn't the same. There was definitely that like the leverage was a concept, was clearly a problem.
Contractors are different from W-2
Right, right.
employees. 100.
Right, your right hand person that you've worked with for 10 years and knows you and knows exactly what you want from it and all that stuff.
So, all right, you come up with a new platform. How did you figure out what that was? Because I think this is where most people get lost in the sauce, especially if they have a liquidity event that doesn't force them to do something else to make money.
Yeah. I did a lot of work on sort of figuring out my core values, my why, the things that and when you actually looked around at all these different things I was doing, they had a common thread. And I was able to sort of identify that core purpose is to share ideas that help people and organizations grow. So that's kind of what I've been doing, both within the organization and outside. I had been figuring out stuff in the company that worked and sharing it with people. And then I had been taking it outside and enjoying watching the impact in other organizations and other leaders and otherwise. And I'd also realized that I could make an impact through my writing, and that was making a difference. So that sort of led me down, like I think there's this writing, speaking, podcast media like that is a platform for ideas that help that to share ideas that help people and organizations grow. And so I'm going to lean in that. I'm going to have those conversations. I'm kind of build an audience. I'm going to talk about these ideas. And look, I don't want to be a full-time speaker. That has its own problems and being away from family otherwise. But I realized, like, hey, one a month is really I like going to this company, sharing these ideas, having people come up afterwards and say, wow, that really helped me. I can do something. I mean, I think you're fundamentally looking to make an impact, right? And you see that impact in your organization. So how do you make that impact? How do you have the connection to other people? So obviously writing can a little not often not a connection, but I ended up doing Substack in a Substack community, and that community can talk with me and ask questions or otherwise. And I think that's where some of the speaking stuff and the podcast, there's more connection. So just thinking about, like, how do I make that impact? And actually one of the decisions in working with someone who's a coach and very provocative was like he was saying to me at one point, like, I think you can make more impact outside your organization than inside your organization with the type of stuff that naturally interests you. And that was sort of one of my motivations in the decision. Like, he's like, look, these 300 people, or potentially, hundreds of thousands of other people.
So uh, when we think about our 8 X's of a founder, becoming a thought leader is what you're describing. And we consider that exit 4, where you go out and you start sharing your ideas and thoughts with other people because you're one of those people who's further down the road than other
Yeah. These
folks.
are the 8 choices you said.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
there's 8 exits that founders go through. And so, man, the the coach, how'd you pick that coach? Because I mean, there's a ton of wisdom there. Because most people are just going to tell you to focus on your own, right? It's very much my house, my people, and
Yeah.
you're like, no,
Oh,
go change the world.
so he wasn't even a coach to me when I got this advice. Become a friend. Philip McKernan, who spoke at MMT. I actually was the first time I had met Philip at another conference. I watched this discussion he actually had with this founder about selling his business, where he admitted that he hated his business and didn't like it and agreed to sell it in 5 minutes, and he'd been tortured for 10 years over this. I was like, I got to talk to this guy. So I like chased him down at lunch, and it was like a 10-minute discussion in which Philip like double clicked on and pretty much like had me in tears around. I was like, I don't, I was like, I don't know whether to do the writing thing or the business thing and all that stuff. And he just sort of like, Philip's the guy who tells you not what you want to hear otherwise. So he got me sort of thinking about that, and what where there's some truths I was trying to avoid, where there's some story. We were great at telling ourselves stories. But I believe in surrounding myself with people who tell me things and that's the person I tend to be for other people who might not be what I need to hear, but not the easy answer, where I'm just looking for them to yes, whatever my thesis is. And if you saw Philip, like, he is not that guy. Like,
No.
so I've had a couple conversations with him, and they have fundamentally changed my perspective on things. And he just seems like very in tune with what it is that someone needs to hear.
Well, and I think there's courage, right? Because a lot of folks are scared they're going to get fired if they say to the person what they don't want to hear, because
Yeah,
there's this echo chamber that many people are trying to cultivate through paying folks. Right? If I
yeah.
hire you as a consultant, you better say what I want you to say, because if you don't, then you're out of here, because I'm going to go find the consultant and tell me what I want to hear.
Yeah,
And
and that's crazy. And Philip's line and what he says is, like, as you get close to the thing you're really meant to do, you will start having the most kicking and screaming and fighting or whatever, because it becomes real, right? And so I think he senses that in those discussions, and that if you're starting to have fear or doubt or otherwise, you're probably getting towards the thing that you think that you might be meant to do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's and so you started building the platform. Um, how do you know when the platform's ready? Because it's kind of like you're jumping curves, and so it's like, all right, I'm whatever my title is in the whole co, and I got this other thing I'm working on the side, guys, and then eventually I'm gonna leave the whole co and go do this thing. And
Yeah.
how do you
Um,
know?
well, I think I guess you know when the boat sinks and you got to jump in and see if the lifeboat holds, right? Or when you're forced to jump. I don't know that you can truly know. But like I said, I think you're building up that lifeboat, and you're gonna want it or need it at some point. And like nothing's going to go as you planned. Like, and even for me, so uh, I sound like I've got this all thought out and figured out or otherwise. I had a year of mental and physical struggles, just from, even though I didn't just from the deceleration of 10 years at 100 miles an hour, like I actually think my body failed to adjust. I had one issue after another. I had all these like crazy things going on. Well, a couple of things. I think one, I got to one finish line, and this is where some coaches and advisors were like, "You look like shit, and like if you don't get your stuff together, like they're like you're like a month after like this thing that you worked really hard for." And what was I trying to do? Like everyone else, what's the next mountain, and how do I climb it, and how fast can I climb it? I didn't even look back. I didn't even enjoy the view. And by the way, it had been exhausting, the due diligence and all that stuff. So I was like on zero and like trying to start the second next leg of the race, which was terrible idea. I've seen this movie. I also, again, on the physical side, I really think I wanted this space and this time and this freedom to start thinking about what's next. And I was very conscious that like I always try to fill time. And I had been going 10 years at 100 miles an hour and 80 hours a week. A lot of times I actually, and again, I heard similar stories from other people. I would get sick on any vacation, and why for years. Why was that? Well, I think my body ran on adrenaline, and so when I actually slept and caught up on sleep, like it was like my defense mechanisms were down. I couldn't get out of bed, and I would get sick. And it like you can make your body do that, right? But it's like the more you do this, the bigger the fall. And I think I had like a meta fall because I think when I then actually had this free time and the space, or otherwise, my adrenaline addicted body was like, where's the stuff? Like, why are we resting? And I just had like, I had health issue after health. Like, I think I thought my doctors thought I was like hypochondriac. Like, it was almost ridiculous. So that was actually like a tough period to get through. I think my body could not adjust to like actually slowing down.
Mhm. So how did you fix that? Because I mean, health is one of the biggest things that I watch people focus on as they're exiting or post exit. They're like, man, I gave up my health for
Yeah.
building this thing. Like, how'd you work through that?
A lot of, I like a lot of different things. Like many things, I attacked it from the mental side, the physical side, doctors, specialists. I started working on body and stretching, and realizing that one thing's connected to another. Meditation, just practicing a whole bunch of different things, and learning kind of just to accept that space and not fill it. We the term like FIFO in accounting, kind of first in, first out. I think it's also one of the dangers is you get the free time, and then people start coming to you with asks and boards and whatever. And that if you just grab the first ones and try to fill the hole because you're used to being busy, it's not going to be the right one. So you want to leave that hole. And then you get to a Friday and you look at your schedule and there's nothing there. and like there's some angst, you know, around that. Like, what do I do today? But I wanted this space. I wanted this space to go think about something or write my story. Or so one of the main things for me was really all of that writing and speaking and stuff. Years had happened on nights and weekends, and my Friday Forward was a Sunday thing I wrote. And so I started bringing my that into my 9 to 5 weekday, and bringing some of the extracurricular stuff into and the one thing I've been pretty good about in the last 2 years, I've been bad on the technology front in the last 6 months with a lot of the crises going on in the world. But I really shut down nights and weekends, like not looking at my email, not doing stuff. I mean, that was just a go-to for so many years. And now I sit down at a football game on Sunday and I'm like, oh crap, look at all my emails from the last 4 days. But there's so many commercials in the game that you can't even watch it, so it's a great time to delete emails. But that was a notable change. And look, you can't I'm getting towards 50. Here's the other thing. You can't play the same game at 50 that you could play at 30. I could just out hustle and outrun people and fly around all the world. And the rebound was okay, and have some drinks and have some coffee. And like, it just doesn't work. Like, you got to figure out to play a different game. So I've eliminated the nights and weekends. I really don't work on the weekends anymore. And I think that's part of the mental and physical health.
Yeah, one of my metrics is days off. I count my days off.
Yeah.
And, for those folks who are there in the hustle and they're working 7 days a week, if you just take the weekends off, it's over 100 days a year that you're off.
Yeah.
And so, like, there's a whole thing there. There was something that you said that I wanted to dig into a little bit. Um, do you believe that the hustle is the way,
Yeah.
or are you finding that you're being more efficient and effective in this new approach?
This is such a tricky question because I think there's different approaches that you need for different seasons, right? And I think when we're in our 20s and 30s and before we have kids and when we have lots of energy and lots of time, like that is a time to probably out hustle some people. And when we don't have the connections and wisdom and a lot of the things, and then I think later on, like you probably need a different approach and you now have some success and you might have some financial security or maybe not, but you have some more networks and you have a sense of hopefully the 80/20 rule. Like I again, it's very conflicting advice because I would say I think you have a lot of folks in their 20s now that have no expertise, no learning or otherwise, and just don't want to work hard. And I actually don't think that's a recipe for success because to me that was learning. That was all about learning, right? In my 20s. But then once you've learned, then you need to start to apply the wisdom and look at it in a different way and figure out what should I do and what not. But I'm not sure you have that in your 20s or you have enough experience or you know to know what you're good at or otherwise. So I, I think you have to play a different game right now. I tell you, my body could not handle the type of schedule that I had, in my 20s. It just couldn't. I'm doing everything I can to help it to do so, but like there's just some basic biological realities and things that we fight. So I think you're forced to do that, but and I don't think it's bad to sprint from time to time. The problem is I think everyone says, "Oh, I'm gonna recover." I mean, we understand interval training and athletes, but oftentimes they don't. They don't do the interval. They don't take the break. No, they don't take the vacation. They don't and I was talking to some people from the legal industry and I'm like, "Oh, well, my spouse, they're just going to do it for like 5 years and then they're going to do something." I'm like, no, it doesn't. Like, then 5 years, they're going to be like, you're 2 years away from partner and here's some more money. Like, I don't think it's like a bad thing to say, I'm going to go all out for five. But the reality is, I think very few people, as you do that, you start to have more success and you more thing and more rewards. And then it's no one ever turns it off at the top, right? You have to usually have some health scare or something or otherwise or something that gives you perspective. And I had those too. So
Yeah, the trap of more is a thing. You know, it's very interesting. If you have discretionary cash, eh, people consider that wealthy. If you have discretionary time, people consider you lazy. And I think the time is a non-renewable resource. And so the thought that not having discretionary time is like having discretionary time is a bad thing, I think is just a folly. And I I I struggle with hustle culture. I think it's killing a lot of people and creating this perception of efficiency that isn't real because they're not actually being productive in a lot of the
Yeah.
time that they're
You can't
spending.
you can't outrun the 80-20 rule. It's been proven over and over again. So, but at the same time, I would say I'm not a fan of hustle culture, but I'm also like not a fan of not working hard. And particularly when you lock in to what it is that you're good at or otherwise, like, "Oh, I'm going to give a mediocre effort, right? That doesn't tend to work. But
It,
just hustling is not the right answer.
yeah, it doesn't work. And I mean, look, the proof's in the pudding, man. Like you've got like 90,000 followers on LinkedIn. You've got a top 0.1% podcast. Like you've created a platform when most people have no idea what a platform is, and you're reaching tons and tons of people, which speaks to impact and influence and a bunch of other things. I'm grateful that you've come on and shared your perspective with us today because I don't think most people could get a cup of coffee with you to find out a lot of the things that we discussed today. Um, and so, with that said, I like to wrap these interviews up by asking the question of what's the one thing you want people to take away? Because we've covered so much ground, uh, they could get lost in some pocket. But if there was just one thing that they took away from this episode, what would that be?
Yeah, I love Stephen Covey's begin with the end in mind, right? And I think that you when you were asking me about how I know this right partner, I said because I had, written something 3 years before. And how did you know you want? Well, I'd thought about it, years before and thought about the end result that I wanted, and then went and found the right people that got me there. Again, it's very hard in the moment to make good decisions. I think that emotion comes into play, the more problems into play, cognitive bias comes into play. I think when similar advice, when people say like, what's the price in the envelope that you'd sell your company for? And like, and if everyone offers it, you take it, because the amount of people then who think they want more and never get another offer. To me, there's a whole equivalence around that. That's not about price, but like, again, what do you want? What are you looking for? Write that plan out, put it in an envelope, think about the people that are on that road that you can talk to, and just be intentional, because you'll get to where you want to go if you focus that energy in a direction. But I think it's very hard to make good decisions in real time. So I would think about what you want, and work backwards from that.
That is so fascinating. I've not actually heard anybody say it's hard to make good decisions in real time. But when I look at your trajectory of you, right? So, hey, this guy's working on current year, I'm working on the future. You already mentioned I wrote the thing down 3 years ago. Financial partner showed up, and it might be a little woo woo for some people, but some of this is manifestation. Like you're
Yeah.
painting the picture that you want to see happen, and in some way, shape, or
I
form,
like how
it's
you say that,
exactly.
the woo woo. I'm a big believer in that stuff. And there's the piece of it that we don't understand. And then there's just if you know what you want, you make the right phone call, you find the right connection. Like there's a non woo woo part of, very practically, I always call it black Jetta syndrome. When you buy a black Jetta, you see it everywhere on the road. It's not that it didn't exist before, it's just that you're much more in tune to it, right? And paying attention to other people that have that car.
You have to trigger the reticular activating system in order to see what you need to see to get to where you want to go. Man, this has been phenomenal. I knew it was going to be when I asked you. So, Bob, thanks so much, man, for jumping on with us today. It's been a real pleasure and a treat for me.
Thanks for having me. And look, this is important work that you're doing. I think it's needed, but a lot of people don't talk about it. And again, they don't know they need it until it's too late. So hopefully we'll get them thinking about this stuff before before it's necessary.
Outstanding. To the listeners, your dreams should be real. We'll catch you on the next episode.